again what I said before. Pairing, pairing the work with the aim, with the desire to to do the exercises um, to accomplish the the task, the goal, which is to be present in every minute, at every time, no matter what, you know. It's,
Well, Mr. Gurdjieff said specifically that, you know, even for his most senior students, they should only try to spend 1/3 of the time awake. So it's perfectly acceptable to spend a lot of time, you know, trapped in your thoughts and things like that. But, you know, we have to begin to sort of pull the machine into order. And one way we pull it into order is by practicing the inner work. And the best time to do that is first thing in the morning when you wake up, unless you've had a poor night's sleep or whatever. That's when we're most collected. That's when we have the most energy. Mr. Gurdjieff also said that we collect, the energy necessary for our daily work at night. And then we use it all up on negative emotions and formatory thinking and identification and imagination and various other processes. So right first thing in the morning, we still have that energy. We haven't used it up on those negative manifestations of waking sleep. And so that is the time when we can be most productive in our inner work. And I've also found myself that if I do inner work in the morning, I actually start when I wake up. I don't get out of my bed. I start inhabiting my body, and I start breathing and thinking I am and various different things. And I find that, you know, when I do something in the morning, it has a residual effect throughout the day. So if I just get up and I start running and I've got to do all of these different things, then I don't have as much energy in the day for inner work. So, Ben, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Good, good. I noticed a fan going in the background. How's the temperature down there?
It's pretty hot now.
Yeah. No, we're gonna have our hottest day of the year up here in Toronto.
Mm-hmm.
So we're gonna. I can't even think about what it is in Fahrenheit because I read it in Celsius, but it's like I think we're gonna have like 33 degrees.
I actually use Celsius right now because
you do?
yeah. So it's like 20. Yesterday was 26 degrees Celsius.
26. Well, we're gonna. It's supposed to be 32 today, but they say with the Humidex, it's gonna be 40.
Oh wow!
So we have a heat warning, and I'm leading a mindfulness walk this afternoon, but I don't think I'm going to take them on the real hard walk. I think I'll just try and stick to the shade as much as possible.
Right.
You know, maybe do some meditations under the tree in the park, and how's it going with you?
Pretty good. Pretty good, I would say. Just a little tired always, but that's all right.
Is it because you don't get enough sleep, or
probably? I mean,
or are you one of these like these traditional young people who go to bed with your cell phones and just, you know, last thing before you go to sleep?
No, it's just I exercise a lot and then don't sleep enough, probably.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, Mr. Gurdjieff said something like, you know, we can get by on 5.5 hours sleep if we break all the connections between our centers at night. But if we dream, we need 7.5 hours, and, depending on the nature of the sleep we get. He says dreaming is actually one center watching another center. And he also said to pay attention to your dreams and try to figure out, are your dreams primarily powered by the intellectual center, the physical center, or the emotional center? And if you can determine sort of the center of gravity of your dreams, you'll realize where you're not using up all your energy during the day, and you'll have to do more work in that area to use that energy up so that you can sleep properly.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just wondering, Martin and Francis.
I think Martin said he was working or something.
Did he?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Francis is away from the site, very, very far away from the site. He's not here.
Oh, Francis won't be here today. Ian, oh yeah, no, okay, so it's just us.
Mm-hmm.
So how's everyone doing? You know, can we bring our attention as best we can to our body, to our breath, you know, to become aware of our body, to become aware of our breathing, just to ground ourselves in a collected state. Now, something that we should have talked about a bit earlier in the sequence, and I realized just how important it is. Mr. Gurdjieff talked about how we need to become aware of our nothingness. And I have to admit, I have a little problem with the term nothingness, because there's the little nothingness that we can experience at the start of the work. And then there is the big nothingness that we can experience many years down the path. And the big nothingness is the no thingness, where we realize that we are not a thing. So when we realize and we stop identifying with our body, and we stop identifying with our essence, and we stop identifying with any kind of noun, anything that can be, we can talk about as a noun, like a thing, and we realize our no thingness. At the beginning of the work, it's better, the term I prefer is to be aware of our insignificance. And this is also a word Mr. Gurdjieff uses. And another word he uses is non-entityness. To be aware that it's a pretty hopeless situation. Most people live in a state of waking sleep. There's very little difference between the dream state and the waking state. He actually says the waking state is a bit more dangerous, because in the dream state, we're fast asleep. Our body's not moving, but we wake up, and we wake up into this dream-like existence where we're projecting things on the world. We're not seeing the world as it is. It's like we've got these rose-colored glasses on that prevent us from seeing the situation as it really is. And he also refers to the fact that this is an act of kindness on the part of great nature, because most of us, you know, we were really serving as fertilizer, where we're not able to really grow our being. We're not able to see the situation as it really is. And so he said nature, great nature, implanted an organ in us that prevents us from seeing the true nature of reality, or else we would be horrified. There's a metaphor that he gave to Fritz Peters when Fritz Peters was about 12, 13, staying at the Prieuré in France as a boy. Fritz Peters didn't have any choice about going there. His aunt was Margaret Anderson, and she was one of the women involved in the Little Review, which is an avant-garde magazine that was produced in New York City. They actually got charged with obscenity by the US government and were convicted because they published the James Joyce novel Ulysses. They were the first ones to publish it in America. But his mother had problems, and she got a divorce, and she was somewhat emotionally unstable. So she let Jane Heap and Margaret Anderson adopt her children, Tom and Fritz Peters. and they were followers of Mr. Gurdjieff. And so Fritz Peters wound up at the Prieuré as a young teenager. And so fairly, after he had been there like a year or whatever, one day, Mr. Gurdjieff asked him to look out the window and to tell him, "What do you see?" And Fritz Peters looked out and, "I don't know, what do you see?" And he said, "I see an oak tree." And then Mr. Gurdjieff, said, "How many acorns do you think are on the oak tree?" And he said, "Thousands." I've actually researched it, and a mature oak tree produces approximately 8,000 acorns per year. And then Mr. Gurdjieff asked Fritz Peters, "How many acorns do you think actually grow into trees? How many of those acorns each year?" And Fritz said, maybe one or two. And Mr. Gurdjieff said, probably not even that. And if you looked at it from, one perspective, it's like this tremendous waste. I mean, shouldn't all 8,000 acorns become oak trees? But if they did, the planet would be filled with oak trees. If you have a grove of oak trees, chances are none of them will become an oak tree, because each tree needs a certain space. It needs a certain amount of sunlight. When the trees are up there and they're taking that sunlight, there's not a lot of possibility for growth below. Lightning has to hit a tree or it has to fall down in order for a new tree to grow. But he said the thousands of acorns serve as fertilizer. So seedlings, they become the food for deer. Some of the acorns become food for squirrels and the other animals. And he said, great nature doesn't waste anything. And it's all part of the economy of the planet. And the implication was that we human beings are in a similar state. Most of us will not sprout. Most of us will not become seedlings. Most of us will not grow from seedlings into trees. And it doesn't mean, from great nature's perspective, that our existence is wasted. But what great nature does is to cloud us. And the way great nature clouds us is through the development of our ego. So that, we think everything revolves around me, 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 that subjectivizing principle of me, me, me. And, our self-importance, our self-love, our vanity. He told C.S. Knott that the ego is a very important mechanism. And do not try to destroy a normal person's ego, because it's a very protective mechanism. And he talked about the twin sentinels of self-love, Monsieur Self-Love and Madame Vanity. And these are actually protective qualities for most people. Now, as a hypnotherapist, there's something that we talk about in hypnotherapy called the critical factor of the conscious mind. No one knows what it is. It's just this fancy word that hypnotherapists have developed to explain why we do not accept suggestions in our normal state of waking awareness. So someone could say, "Oh, you shouldn't eat that," and we'll still eat that. Or "You should be exercising," and we won't exercise. Good suggestions bounce off and bad suggestions bounce off. And a person has to go into the somnambulist state. They've got to go into a fairly deep hypnotic state for that mechanism to be removed and for them to be able to accept positive suggestions. And when I came across, the critical factor of the conscious mind and what Mr. Gurdjieff talked about, they really fit together. I think part of the critical factor of the conscious mind is the ego. It's a sentinel that protects normal people. It protects them from seeing the true nature of reality. It protects them from realizing that, our purpose on this planet is to serve as food. Even the enlightened beings serve as food. They just serve as higher food, and they serve it consciously. Most people don't want to think that they are like the acorns on the ground that turn into mulch and then become the soil that, you know, future trees grow from. Most people like to think that, you know, they create these elaborate stories about themselves, and perhaps they only achieve a level of real self-importance in the context of their families or their friends or their jobs. You know, I was struck a number of years ago about the fact, and this, I read this, that even the lowliest beggar looks down on people. Even the lowliest beggar has this self-love and this ego structure that there are people that they hold in contempt. So normally the ego is this protective mechanism that prevents us from seeing reality as it is. Mr. Gurdjieff used another metaphor with Uspensky when he said that people are like sheep, and there's a magician, and the magician realized that to control the sheep, he's got to make one think that he's a king and another that he's, you know, whatever. And he, you know, projected and hypnotized them into these false beliefs, these things that are untrue, so that they go merrily about their business and eat the grass and transform the energy and, you know, provide the service that they are doing to this planet. And now here it comes into a phrase that Mr. Gurdjieff used, the terror of the situation. This is something particularly that he talks about in the chapters on Ashiata Shaimesh in Beelzebub Tales, but he's mentioned it elsewhere. If we have the illusions stripped from us, if we have our belief in our own self-importance, our self-love, our self-conceit stripped from us, for most people, this would be a diabolical thing. The realization would be so destructive, so disheartening, that they could have a mental collapse. They could have all sorts of problems. Now, Mr. Gurdjieff said that a normal person, someone who does not have the magnetic center, someone who is not drawn to the path, we should never try to wake them up. We should never try to artificially impose a path on them. He said it's like making them stand up and taking the chair away. And then he said they will have to stand up for the rest of their life. And that gets very uncomfortable. So one of the things that he did when people expressed an interest in becoming one of his students, he interviewed them. And, you know, what is so dissatisfying about your life? What is so terrible about your life? And most of his students, talked about how terrible, you know, how dissatisfied they were and all of that. A remarkable one and a very interesting story was Thomas and Olga de Hartmann. Olga de Hartmann, her father was one of the top bureaucrats. He ran a ministry in the pre-revolutionary Russia, but he doted on his daughters. He would take the afternoon off, take them to ballet. So she grew up in a very, very sort of semi-aristocratic household. And Thomas de Hartmann was a composer. You know, he studied with some of the great composers in Europe. He was an officer in the Tsarist court, and he was relieved of duty, not relieved of duty, but he was exempt from duty because of his musical skills. And when Mr. Gurdjieff interviewed them, they said, you know, there's nothing really wrong with our life, but we would die if we couldn't follow mystical teaching. They didn't quite phrase it that way, but, you know, they didn't have the dissatisfaction of their lives. They had great lives, but they still needed to know this truth. They still needed to follow the path. And so Mr. Gurdjieff wanted to make sure that the people who came and spent time with him had this tremendous degree of inner satisfaction. All the normal pursuits in life, all of the normal things that people use to keep themselves in that state of waking sleep, whether or not it's sports or nowadays television, movies, music, arts, you know, all of those things that a normal person can sort of take, you know, to take refuge in, to not see reality for what it is. All of those illusions, delusions, dreams that a normal person experiences are all protective. So waking sleep and that dreamlike state is a very, very protective state for most people. It prevents them from seeing the terror of the situation. But those who entered and started on the path, Mr. Gurdjieff said it was very important for them to see their non-entityness, to see that they were insignificant. In Views from the Real World, there's a talk that, Views from the Real World was compiled by Madame de Salzman after Mr. Gurdjieff died, and she solicited notes that people had taken of lectures and talks that he gave. And one of them, he said, you know, go out into the middle of a field in the middle of the night or at nighttime and look up at the sky and look up at the billions of stars up in the sky and reflect on the fact that there could be billions of life forms as smart or even smarter than you up there, and to really reflect on how immense the universe is, how insignificant we are. And, you know, perhaps you should be going back to your delusions and delusions, and only if there is something that really, really hurts you, that really wants you to become something, should you embark upon the path. It's better to maintain that state of delusion, that state of illusion, because once you embark upon the path, you are trapped between a rock and a hard place. You will never experience the happiness and the contentment, you know, that proverbial house with the white picket fence and the wonderful neighbors and, you know, the great job and all of that. You will be stepping into an extremely uncomfortable position when you embrace the path. Now, some of us, for myself, I really don't believe I had the choice. Once my magnetic center was activated, there was no turning back. But I was aware already before that, you know, I was broken and, you know, insignificant, and I was aware of various different things that just hadn't crystallized in me. And for those who were new to Mr. Gurdjieff and those who started with him, you know, he would tell them things like, you're going to die like a dog. You know, do you want to die like a dog or do you want to die like a man? You know, most of us, you know, we're fertilizer. And he would tell, you know, the particularly ladies of the rope, he would say, you know, I'm only telling you that you're a piece of shit because I don't want you to be a piece of shit. I want you to become a real human being. So he would, you know, get at people. He would make them realize the terror of their situation, make them realize that they had spent their life in the state of being a non-entity. I posted something interesting just in the last couple of weeks about educating children. For instance, he said it was wrong to praise children. If they do something well, they will develop an intrinsic awareness of doing something, or if they do something right, they will develop an intrinsic awareness of doing something right. But if we excessively praise a child, they will become dependent on the praise. And we live in a society where, you know, self-esteem for children, you know, back in the 90s in particular, I think it's lessening a little bit now, but it was this whole process of raising children's esteem, telling them they're wonderful, giving them gold stars and things like that. Mr. Gurdjieff said that that sense of achievement should really be internal and it should come from ourselves. But we live in a society that artificially creates the ego. It artificially cocoons people. You know, the high school commencement speeches. You can be anything that you want, and you know, this is how you follow your dreams. If I was ever asked to give a high school commencement speech, I would say your teachers have all lied to you. They've all told you stories, and they've been very deceptive, and they've told you things that are not true. You cannot be anything you want. You cannot reach your dreams. Occasionally, life works out, and fate and various currents can, you know, coincide, and you actually become something. But most people don't. Um, you know, I've known a lot of people, and sorry, Ben, you know, they have these dreams of being musicians, and you know, they form bands, and maybe 1 out of 1,000 bands actually begins to make it. I have these friends, they're my daughter's friends, but they've become my friends, and they are one of the top indie bands in Toronto. And you know, they last year they were given an award of, you know, one of the best newcomer acts in Toronto, except they've been around for 9 years. They formed at the music department of the best musical school in Toronto. It's not like they did this overnight, and they haven't really made any money from it yet. And so many others, you know, it just falls to the wayside, not just, you know, musicians, but writers. You know, when I was a kid, everyone wanted to be a writer. And now, you know, there's no money in writing, not even writing newspapers, they're closing. And, you know, it's all of these illusions, these delusions that we carry around. So it's very, very important to realize when we're on the path and we're called to the path, that unless we really, really do the inner work, unless we start doing the inner exercises, unless we become conscious of our breathing, aware of the air flowing in through our nostrils, nose, back of mouth, throat, down in our vocal cords, into our lungs, becoming aware of the process of breathing out, the movement of the various muscles involved, become aware of the process of digesting the air, to become aware of our body, to really try to bring our awareness back into our body as often as we can, to become aware of our body from the bottom of our feet to the top of our head, to become aware of the touch of air on our skin, the clothing on our body, to bring ourselves back to what is real, what is here and now in this moment. And I actually briefly talked about this with Michael yesterday, that the main problem is the misuse of C12. C12 is the highest energy that a natural man produces. We eat food. Food comes in as the dough into our mouth, and it meets with the saliva, which is the higher carbon, and then it goes into our stomach and meets the gastric juices. Then it goes into our duodenum, our liver, our cerebral hemispheres, to our cerebellum, and then down into our testes, or ovaries if you're a woman, where it is then transformed into the most refined energy a normal human being can produce. And C12 is responsible for imagination. It's responsible for negative emotions. It's responsible for building sandcastles in the sky. It's responsible for sustaining and maintaining all of the illusions and delusions and dreamlike states that we exist in. And in Search of the Miraculous, the term that Mr. Gurdjieff uses to describe this is vehemence. He said you can taste the misuse of C12 by the vehemence that's hidden in it. And to me, it's even more apparent that behind every use of or misuse of C12 is the ego. It's the me, subjectivizing principle. And the Olympics, for instance, the desire to win gold, the desire to represent your country, you know, the desire to win the Stanley Cup or the Super Bowl or whatever, all sports, particularly competitive sports. At the basis, there's that ego. The ego rules politics, it rules business, it rules the acquisition of money. It's this misuse of this energy. And I once came up with a metaphor. Imagine a spray bottle that sprays out this mist, and you can spray this mist and imagine that you see gold and riches and stuff in it, but the mist just falls to the ground and there's no reality to it. Or you can turn the spray on yourself and you can spray and grow something real. So this energy that we waste through our imagination, through our daydreams, through the wrong work of our centers, through our negative emotions, through our formatory thinking, if we turn it and use it lawfully, and the lawful use of C12 of this particular energy is the sensation of ourself. So whenever we become aware of our body, whenever we sense our body, whenever we sense our body breathing, whenever we become aware of the internal sensory perceptions, our esophagus, our stomach, perhaps our liver, our abdomen. I'm sure Michael's feeling that a bit more than normal because of the stomach bug that he's feeling. He's aware more of those internal sensations, or the external sensations, the sensations on our skin, our hands, our feet. We actually have more sensory nerve nodes in our hands and feet per square centimeter than anywhere else in our body, less in our lower back and our back. And it makes sense. I mean, our hands are disproportionately represented in our brain and take up gray matter because of what we need to do with it. But whenever we bring our awareness back to ourselves, it's like we are creating this fine dusting, this fine coating on ourselves. And every time we become aware of our body, it's like we're leaving this imperceptible crystallization, this imperceptible layer within us behind. And like a stalactite that grows from, 100,000 or 1,000,000 drops from the roof of a cave. As we keep on bringing our awareness back to our body, each one of these imperceptible impressions builds up, and we eventually develop something real within ourselves. And he talked about this as, the crystallization of our higher bodies. Now, it's a little bit more complex than that. He's saying good morning. It's a little bit more complex than that because, we have the head brain perceptions, the body brain perceptions, and the feeling brain perceptions. And I've talked about this previously, how the proper form and sequence of collecting impressions grows our inner body, grows our Kesdran body, our astral body in a more balanced fashion. But when we realize, we've got to become aware that everything that we've believed up until this moment, or until we stepped on the path, is most likely wrong. It's delusionary, it's illusionary. It's designed to keep us in this state of waking sleep so that we do not realize the terror of the situation, that we are really non-entities, that we are really nothing. So this is a very important realization. Mr. Gurdjieff put it right at the beginning of the path. It was something very important for people to realize. And I know that, for instance, the foundation, quite often, particularly certain groups like Toronto, I know a young man who was in the Toronto Foundation group, and he said that it was so psychologically disabling because you're going to die like a dog and, you're insignificant. And they spent 3 years trying to get him to realize his own insignificance. And he found that profoundly disturbing. And he said he felt like he needed psychotherapy to cure him of the lingering effects. He eventually left the foundation. But to me, they went a little too overboard. We are machines. We're definitely machines. We spend a lot of our time in the machine-like state. And we are little more than automatons and machines. And this is our natural condition. But what they don't talk about is the moment we become aware of the baby toe in our left foot, the moment we become mindful of our baby toe in our left foot, we are no longer quite as machine-like. That machine-like state is actually fueled by a specific energy, which Mr. Gurdjieff would have called hydrogen 48. So there's a part of us that lives in world 48, fueled by this very habitual mechanical energy. But the moment we step up to the next level, the moment we step up into the level of personal consciousness, the moment we begin, however rudimentary, self-remembering, becoming aware of ourselves in this moment, we are no longer machine-like in that state. So I always think that it should be balanced with the awareness of our non-entityness, the awareness that we are going to die like any other mammal on this planet. So a dog is a mammal, and we don't have that coherence within us that will really give us something to build on, that we will be like that until we actually bring our attention to ourselves, to be aware of our breath, to really begin to do these things. There, I've just given my bit of a lecture. Any comments? I mean, this is so important, particularly, on the path. And I really should have done it in the first meeting. And it's so important. It's essential to realize that, when we're trying to gain some kind of internal coherence, that we're just, these fragmented, broken, disconnected beings. And we do one thing 1 minute and then something completely opposite the next. And it's our buffers that prevent us from putting it all together. And we live in this fractured, broken state, ruled by our illusions and delusions. And it's our ego and the ego structure that gives us the solace and makes us think, that everything's okay, when it really isn't. And if we really looked at ourselves from an objective level, we would realize the terror of our situation. Any comments?
I was, as you were talking about that, I was reminded of a quote. I can't remember it word for word now, but that's where Gurdjieff says, blessed is he who has a soul, blessed is he who hath none, but woe to the man with one development.
Yeah.
Something like that anyway. I can't remember the word for it.
That's a profound quote. Basically, what it means is once you step on the path, you're screwed. You are screwed. Once you step on the path, you're trapped between a rock and a hard place. There's no going back to that state of non-entityness, of illusion and delusion, and you're, years, perhaps even lifetimes away from developing that other bit. And so you're trapped between a rock and a hard place. And that's where anyone, who approached Mr. Gurdjieff and spent time with Mr. Gurdjieff, that's where you end up. You end up in that middle state. And at that point, you can't go back. So the only way is movement forward. Any other comments?
While breathing, I think it's necessary to open your mouth all the time. When especially I myself discovered that if I don't open my mouth, I can exhale. You have to do the proper breathing. You have to be with your mouth open.
Okay.
You do not open your mouth, you're not breathing well. I understand that the nose is for breathing itself, exhaling and inhaling and exhaling. But if I take air and I exhale air, where through? My mouth or my nose?
Well, I when I was in a Bennett group, I wasn't taught about exhalation. I was taught it was important to inhale through the nose, and that this was part of conscious breathing. You know, people who are cocaine addicts, for instance, know that there are nasal membranes right at the top of the nose that are connected to the blood vessels that lead into the brain. And that's why snorting cocaine has a bigger effect than eating it. And when I was taught in the Bennett group was to become aware of the air passing through the bridge of the nose. The breathing out, they didn't really focus on that. Now, there are people who have problems with their adenoids and people who, you know, their noses are congested and it's much more difficult. But I was taught the importance of breathing in through the nose. So I suppose you could breathe out through the mouth. But I'm just going to pull up something on the screen. And this is the quote. Blessed is he who has a soul. Blessed is he who has none. But woe and grief to him who has it in embryo. So that's, and this is actually Mr. Gurdjieff's Armenian travel documents. I'm not sure if it's a passport or whatever. And we can see by the picture, he was fairly young. This was probably the early 20s, maybe late 19, you know, the late teens of the, you know, 1919, 1920 thereabouts, I would guess, because of, you know, the way he looks. So blessed is he who has a soul. Blessed is he who has none. But woe and grief to him who has it in embryo. But yeah, Guido, I know that, you know, when I've gone to Hindu groups and we've done Om chanting, they've said breathe in through your nose and then do the Om out through your mouth in order to make the sounds. And they talk about that important aspect of bringing the vocalization in. They actually talk about how Om begins in the nasal part of the mouth and then it moves down. So Om, and then it gets lower. So it starts as a nasal and moves down. And the way we properly do it is breathing in through the nose and then out through the mouth. Any other comments about this, you know, reflection on, you know, the fact that we have to realize our own insignificance, our non-entityness?
I've had moments, I guess you'd call, just moments, where I've just seen in myself the feeling I've had of hopelessness in relation to my mechanicality. And in those moments, though, it's also given me the wish to want for something more. You know, you just see this internal talk, this considering this stuff, and you realise there's so little you can do about it sometimes. It's so rampant. But from that stems this wish for something more. But it's seeing that futility, it's seeing the terror of the situation that fuels that wish.
For me, a huge moment. You know, I first encountered the teachings as a 23-year-old student in 1981. And my ex-wife, and I do love her, I care about her, became a she-devil the last trimester of every pregnancy. And I always said, if I remember this, I would never have another child. And my last child, when she was in the last trimester, I was talking about the Gurdjieff teachings, and she looked at me and said, "You haven't changed at all. You're still the same person." And this was like 13 years later. And I realized that, damn it, she was right. That I had internalized this teaching in my head brain, but I still had the same problems. I still had the same breaks. And it was such a shock to me. It was it was devastating. The accuracy of it, and just the way it was thrown at me, and it shook me and reverberated me for a long, long time. To realize that, you know, I am nothing. You know, I had all of these words, all of this talk, but I hadn't changed. Fortunately, I got to a point where I did change, but it took me like almost another 10 years of really working on myself before it began to become apparent to me. But at that point, it was devastating. It was, you know, my non-entityness, my nothingness, my inability in the face of what I wanted to do and the ideals and everything that I held in my mind, and how I was still the same person. But I was in Ottawa, and there were no Gurdjieff groups in Ottawa, so it was like I was a very solitary Gurdjieffian. So I didn't have the weekly meetings and the other things to sustain me, and it was so true. It was so devastating. That realization, that awareness, and you're right. When you have that awareness, it's like you can't go back to sleep. It's like it's a motivating factor that pushes you on, that makes you, you know, strive even more. You know, once something in you starts to awaken, you know, woe to you to have a soul in, you know, embryo, because then it's devastating. I mean, Guido, when you know, when we came on this morning, you know, right at the beginning, it sounded like you had a bit of an episode like that this week. Sort of a bit of discouragement and the struggle with inner work. Am I correct in assuming that?
Listen, I lost my stylus. The stylus is the pencil that works with the new tablet. And I'm so worried about it. It costs me $100 to buy a new one.
Okay.
And I'm really discomfort with that. I just lost it stupidly, you know. I hold it in my hand, get off my car, and just drop it on the street. I'm so fucked up.
So you're beating yourself up. Yeah.
Yeah. Because I had to spend $100 to buy a new one.
Yeah. You know, the negative emotion, when you look at that negative emotion, that's the misuse of C12. And underneath it is your ego. That is being supported, sustained, maintained by your ego. That me, you know, that hurt. And if you can see it, it gives you a greater opportunity to be aware of just how pervasive the ego is. You've got to just let go of that. You know, just it's happened. It's water under the bridge. Just don't worry about that. You know, there's a difference between the subjective suffering, which is fueled by the ego, and the objective suffering. And there is a tremendous opportunity to suffer objectively in this. And the way to suffer objectively in this is to suffer from it, but not the ego. So it's like I got to take it on the chin and oh well, and you know, various different other ways to deal with it. Ben, any reflections yourself on this? You're young, so you're new to the path.
I guess not really. I guess the only thing that I've thought of is what you said about the dreams, and I guess the dreams. And I think for me, maybe the emotional center is there, because my dreams are usually very vivid in emotions and stuff like that. So I'm like thinking like how could I incorporate that more into my life, I guess, or on a day-to-day basis.
Well, you have a perfect opportunity because you're a musician.
That's right.
And I once sort of gave a series of talks in a fall on linking the Gurdjieff teachings to the Bible. This was years ago, and I turned 50 in that process. And I was actually one of the younger people there. The people that I attracted were generally men in their late 50s and early 60s. And I, at the very last, on the 12th lecture that I gave, I did inner exercises after each lecture. And the inner exercise was to experience joy, to really begin to manifest joy. And I led them on this 40-minute exercise where the end was to breathe in joy. And then I said, how many of you were able to breathe in joy? And they all looked at me and went. And then there was one person there. His name is Leroy. And I didn't believe him. I said, Leroy, even you? And he went. And I said, I don't believe that, Leroy. I don't believe that. I see something in you. And he didn't experience the joy. And then I continued having meetings with them. That was up until Christmas. And then we started to meet again in January. And I had rented a room in a basement of a church. And one evening that room had actually been booked. So they bumped us up to a better room. And there was a piano in the better room. And he sat down and he went, and I said, there, you can create conscious feelings, but you just need to do it with your fingers on the piano. But you can use this to, elicit joy and elicit all kinds of emotions. And I told him that what he had to learn to do is to just, where he's sitting, to just begin to try his best to bring that feeling of delight, that feeling of joy into his life. So to use the emotions, try to be a bit more emotional. Something that I talk about in other groups that I have, there was a psychologist, I think it was it's probably 25 years ago. There's a 4-minute Big Think video of him saying that he accidentally discovered something, and his discovery made it onto the front page of the New York Times. And he said psychologists never make it onto the front page of the New York Times. And he didn't even set out to discover this. And he didn't quite explain it in the video, but I knew enough about physiology and this whole process. He said that most people smile with their lips. And this is, he said there's two muscles that go to our lips, the zygomatic major and minor muscles. And he said 10% of the population smile. There's a ribbon-like muscle under the bones that go around the eyes. So whenever we squint, we're using the orbicularis oculi. It's the little circle eye muscles. And he said 10% of the population smile with both the eyes and the lips. And he said that people who smile with the orbicularis oculi, the little circle eye muscles, that they are able to become joyful. They are able to bring and start to manifest the feeling of joy within themselves. And I have to admit, I couldn't figure out why, when I was first taught how to self-remember in 1981, I was able to breathe in a feeling of joy and delight where no one else in the class was, and why this wasn't as difficult for me as it was for other people. And I've subsequently realized I was one of the 10% who could naturally smile with the eyes and the lips. But he said that everyone can be taught to do that. And one of the ways is to, look into a mirror and have something covering our face and just do our best to bring a smile into our eyes. And when we do that, we bring up that feeling of joy, that feeling of delight. I'm also a certified NLP practitioner, neuro-linguistic programming. It's very connected to hypnosis. And the people that I first studied hypnosis with, I first studied NLP, and then I took their workshops on hypnosis. And in NLP, they talk about, states and learning how to control our feeling states. And there's a way of walking down the street that if you walk and you start moving your arms and your legs and whatever, you will begin to bring that feeling into you. So there are specific ways that we can begin to deliberately start working with more emotions. Just walking down through an emotional state is very, very healing. Years ago, when I suffered from severe depression for a couple of years, I knew all of this. And for me, my backup was I would close the curtains, I would shut the doors, and I would put on a song called Walking on Sunshine by a band called Katrina and the Waves. And I would just around the room and dance. And sometimes I'd have to listen to the song 2, sometimes 3 times. But I consciously, through my movement, through my breathing, through just the way I was, altered my feeling state. And so, for you, Ben, I don't know about playing the, the whatever the big one, but there are, some of the instruments you play. Just really, really focus on the emotional state, focus on the feeling state, focus on expressing that emotion, on working with that brain, and then see if your dreams have that emotional content or if you can use that energy up throughout the day. Okay, let's just take a moment and become aware of our physical body. Now, I'm going to do a mirror image. I'm going to do an inverse exercise of an exercise that I did and I learned in a Bennett group. So just become aware of your body. Become aware of the position of your body in space. Become aware of your breathing. Breathe in through your nose and become aware of the air as it passes the bridge of your nose. Imagine breathing in these finer particles, these higher qualities in through your nose. And then imagine as you breathe out, something stays within you. Breathing in and then breathing out, gray, foggy waste. Breathing in and imagining something stays in you as you breathe out that gray, foggy waste. Perhaps even breathing in the word I, and then breathing out the word and. Breathing in I, breathing in these higher particles, and as you breathe out the word and, imagine breathing out the gray, foggy waste and something stays within you. And now I'm going to go through J.G. Bennett's 60-point self-sensing exercise. And this is also relaxation as well. So bring your awareness to the top of your head. And then breathe in awareness, breathe in attention, and then breathe out any tension. Breathe in awareness into the right side of your forehead and breathe out tension. Breathe in awareness into your right eye and breathe out tension. The right side of your nose and face. Your right ear and the finer muscles in the right side of your head. The right side of your nose and mouth. Or not your nose and mouth, your mouth and jaw, the right side of your mouth and jaw. The right side of your throat and neck. Your right shoulder. Your right upper arm. Your right elbow. Your right lower arm. Your right wrist. The top of your right hand. Your right thumb. Your right index finger. your right middle finger, your right fourth finger, your right baby finger, the palm of your right hand, breathing in perhaps molecules of awareness and breathing out tension to the right side of your chest, the right side of your midriff and solar plexus, the right side of your lower abdomen, the right side of your upper back and right shoulder blade, the right side of your lower back, your right buttock and hip, your right upper leg, your right knee, your right lower leg, your right ankle, the top of your right foot, your right big toe, your right second toe, your right middle toe. The next one I have the most difficulty with, your right fourth toe, your right baby toe, the bottom of your right foot. Now reversing this process and breathing in awareness and breathing out tension to the bottom of your left foot. Your left baby toe. Your left fourth toe. Your left middle toe. Your left second toe. Your left big toe. The top of your left foot. Your left ankle. Your left lower leg. Your left knee. Your left upper leg. Your left hip and buttock. The left side of your lower back. Your left shoulder blade and upper back. The left side of your lower abdomen. The left side of your solar plexus and midriff. The left side of your chest. The palm of your left hand. your left baby finger, your left fourth or ring finger, your left middle finger, your left index finger, your left thumb, the top of your left hand, your left wrist, your left lower arm, your left elbow, your left upper arm, your left shoulder, the left side of your neck and throat, the left side of your jaw and mouth, the finer muscles in the left side of your head and your left ear, the left side of your face and nose, your left eye, the left side of your forehead, and then finishing with the top of your head. And then just briefly scan down through your body, and find any place where you still may have a degree of residual tension, and just breathe that tension away. Just relax your whole body. And then we're going to do Mr. Gurdjieff's filling exercise. As a vessel fills with warm golden honey, imagine your body filling with sensation, starting in the feet, filling your feet with sensation, then up to your ankles, and then filling with sensation up to your knees, up to your hips and hands, up to your middle back, midriff, elbows, filling with sensation up to your upper back, upper arms, chest, filling with sensation from your feet all the way up to your shoulders, from your feet all the way up to your neck, and then filling with sensation from your feet all the way up to your head and the top of your head. And try to sense your body as one organic whole. And then we're going to do the inverse of an exercise. I want you to, in your own way, using your imagination, imagine that you can become aware of your presence, that you can become aware of yourself sitting in your room. And then imagine you can become aware of yourself sitting in your apartment, your building, your house. And then imagine, your view expands and you become aware of yourself in your neighborhood, So beginning to see yourself getting smaller and more insignificant. Imagine you can perceive yourself in your city, one life form, one human out of perhaps millions or thousands. And then imagine that you move to a national perspective and that you can get a sense of your insignificance, of your smallness in the context of your country. And then move to a global perspective, how you are merely one human out of 8 billion. And then move to the realm of the solar system. Imagine how small you are on this small planet in this large solar system. And then imagine seeing yourself from the perspective of our galaxy, perhaps millions of stars. The Earth itself becomes completely insignificant, and you become completely insignificant on the face of the Earth. And then imagine expanding your awareness into the entire universe, all 14.5 billion years across, perhaps billions, tens of billions of life forms, some maybe even smarter than you. And imagine, the Earth is this distant place that's, more like a statistical nothing, an accident in the immensity of the universe. And you are like this insignificant speck on the planet. Imagine having that global, that universal, that perspective of the entire universe and looking and seeing how infinitesimal, how non-existent, how insignificant not only you are, but the whole planet is, all of humanity, the solar system, the galaxy, in comparison to the light years and the immensity and the enormity of the universe. And then let's shift back. Let's move back to the galaxy. And then let's move back to the solar system. And then let's move back to the planet. And then let's move back to the nation. And then let's move back to the city or the region. And then let's move back to the neighborhood. And then let's move back to the room. And then let's move back into yourself and become aware of your body. Sense your body from the bottom of your feet to the top of your head. Sense your body from side to side, from front to back. And then from this position of your body, reflect on the enormity of this universe. Reflect on how big the universe is, how there are possibly billions of other beings, tens of billions, billions of billions of other beings who may be more evolved, more advanced than you are in the universe. And then to reflect, to ask yourself, are you ready to accept this? Are you ready to really begin working on yourself? Are you ready to grow your being? And then just allow your attention to rest and just slowly, be back in your body, be back here. Just return to the normal state that you were in. And my dog's just rolling around. Any comments? Any questions? Anything on this? Michael, any comments?
No,
No.
not at this point.
Ben, any comments?
Nope.
No. Guido, any comments?
I'm not question the possibility of billions of beings living outside the galaxies out
Yeah.
of that, but it's hard to believe that.
Yeah. But I mean, when you think of ourselves existing here, is it really that hard to believe? Let me see if I can find the actual quote. Yeah.
We are millions in here in the planet Earth. In the planet Earth, we are a lot of people. Well, how conscient,
Yeah.
how aware they are is the question.
Yeah. Just give me here. Every seeker dreams of a guide who knows, dreams about him, but seldom asks himself objectively and sincerely, is he worthy of being guided? Is he ready to follow the way? Go out one clear, starlit night to some open space and look up at the sky, at those millions of worlds over your head. Remember that perhaps on each of them swarm billions of beings, similar to you or perhaps superior to you in their organization. Look at the Milky Way. The earth cannot even be a grain of sand in this infinity. It dissolves and vanishes, and with it, you. Where are you? And is what you want simply madness? Before all these worlds, ask yourself what are your aims and hopes, your intentions and means of fulfilling them, the demands that may be made upon you and your preparedness to meet them. A long and difficult journey is before you. You are preparing for a strange and unknown land. The way is infinitely long. You do not know if rest will be possible on the way, nor where it will be possible. You should be prepared for the worst. Take all the necessities for the journey with you. Try to forget nothing, for afterwards it will be too late, and there will be no time to go back for what has been forgotten, to rectify the mistake. Weigh up your strengths. Is it sufficient for the whole journey? How soon can you start? Remember that if you spend longer on the way, you will need to carry proportionately more supplies, and this will delay you further both on the way and in your preparations for it. Yet every minute is precious. Once having decided to go, there is no use wasting your time. And this is from Views from the Real World. And it's a wonderful exercise to go out into the middle of a field, not in a city, but where you can actually see the stars and you can see that enormity, and to reflect on this, reflect on whether or not this path is for you, reflect on whether or not you're willing to embrace your own insignificance, your own non-entityness in the face of such a vast, overwhelming universe. And then if you are, to reflect on how insignificant you are in the face of this universe and how enormous the task that you are really setting out for yourself. You are nothing and you want to become something. You are insignificant and you want to grow some degree of significance by growing your being, by growing up at the higher levels, by attempting to become a link in the chain of creation, a link that can potentially unite heaven and earth through you. It's an enormous undertaking. Do you have what it is within you to become an oak tree? Do you even have what it is within you to become a seedling? Or is it better to live in the state of delusion, in the state of waking sleep? Now, by being here, we've already predicated that, we are on the journey. We accept the journey. We understand the journey. We recognize the journey. But these are important questions to ask ourselves. There have been people who have started on the journey and then they've kind of gone back to sleep. And it is possible to move back into that state of delusion, though it becomes more and more difficult the further on the path that we go. Any final comments, any final questions in the last few minutes? I guess we're all just
what center do you tend to lean towards?
Myself?
Mm-hmm.
I tend to lean more towards the intellectual center.
Mm-hmm.
Or I try to, I really do try, and I do a very good job of it, I think, of inhabiting my body and becoming aware of my emotions. But, years ago, I lived in my head brain. I lived in my thoughts. I lived in my imagination and the associations and what swirled around. And I didn't have any degree of contact with my body. And I didn't have a lot of degree of contact with my feelings as
Mm-hmm.
well. So it's for me, the real work was started with the sensation of self, and then to work towards the development of my feeling states and to begin to consciously feel. But head brain, very definitely, in my imagination. I could imagine, for the Olympics, I was a champion daydreamer when I was a teenager. I just lived in those illusions and delusions. And so when I talk about daydreaming, I know it from the inside, and I know just how underneath it all, it's really the ego. And you daydream yourself into situations where you're like Walter Mitty and you're flying that plane, or you're doing that heroic thing, or whatever. And I've been there. It's been a while now. It's been quite a while, but I know that state very well.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
any other comments, Ben?
Oh no, I was just saying interesting.
Okay. Thank you all for coming today and being here. And we'll talk again next week.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.
All right. See.
Thank you.
Okay.